I'm Sheila Smith, and I latterly, most of the time I worked in the Temple of Peace. I was the director of what is now known as UNA Exchange. In the beginning it was the UNA International Youth Service, so for 26 years that was what I did.
And what is UNA Exchange?
UNA Exchange is, well, it grew out of the United Nations Association in Wales, UNA Wales, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, as a practical, hands-on tool, if you like, to work towards the aims of the UN and the UN Association. So involving young people, particularly in community volunteering, principally in Wales, but in other countries as well. So it was a sort of mass exchange programme of young people from here going abroad and from abroad coming into Wales.
And what countries did you work in?
Well, as an organisation, name a country, and we were working there. It was, I think at its peak, now I don't know, but I think at its peak it was 75, 80 countries, pretty much worldwide. So yeah. We worked through a massive network of international organisations very similar to ourselves. So just as we were here in the Temple of Peace, we linked up with organisations in opposite countries. We only ever worked if there was a partner in that country. We didn't decide we will go and work in Vietnam. So that was an important principle, actually, that it was ground level up. So Valley and Vale in Bridgend County we might have talked together and said, yeah, there's a brilliant project in Betus. We want to do this. Talk to UNA Exchange, we would put together a team of international volunteers, but exactly the same would happen in Lesotho or Mexico or Poland. So the project belonged to Valley and Vale, just as it did in Poland. So those projects changed every year. Some ran for many years, but equally they changed and evolved.
And what were your first impressions of the Temple of Peace, and why was it a sort of fitting building for the work that you did?
Yeah, it was the 80s actually. It was 80. Oh no. Oh well, fake news. No, my initial step was through participating in such a project in Germany in 1986. I went with a friend, actually. We went to Germany and worked on the restoration of a castle, and I was a bit sceptical at first. I wasn't that kind of young. I was a young person then, by the way. I wasn't that kind of young person. I thought it was all going to be banging tambourines and singing around the campfire, which it turned into, but I kind of got into it by then. But so yeah, that was a 2-week project in 86, and then when I came back, it was a time of high youth unemployment. I was 22, I think. No jobs around, and at that time, what is now UNA Exchange had a team of unemployed youth. So I joined that team through the Manpower Services Commission. So it was a part-time 12-month contract. It was brilliant, and it was really, that was the step in. And at the time, we were based in the basement of the Temple of Peace at the time. I can't specifically recall what I thought of the building. It was very grand. It was a part of town I hadn't known. I was a student in Cardiff, and I hadn't known this part of town or this building. So it felt quite austere and formal and grown up in a way. But then I think working here over what was 28 years in the end was a joy to work here. This building is now really, really important to me. It's a really important building for Wales and the people, if you like. But having worked here for so long, there's something of the spirit of the building in the atmosphere here, I think, and the reason it was built and the history of the building, I think I find really important. And yeah, it was a privilege and a pleasure to work here for that length of time, and in this part of town as well, which is a really beautiful part of Cardiff. So and you think of all the people that came through the doors, you know, the public and, I don't know, poor students who came for their exams. But then equally, I wasn't here at the time, but the Secretary General of the United Nations came in, I think it was shortly before I started, and ambassadors and politicians and, you know, the great and the good as well. So it really was a big mixture of people that came and used the building and still do and still will in the future. So if you'd said Temple of Peace to me before 1986, I would have thought it was the City Temple. I would have thought it was the church, a church.
And for you, what the idea of having a Temple of Peace in the heart of Cardiff, what does that mean and what does that represent?
I think symbolically it is really important, and in that sense the work you're doing and Wales for Peace is doing is really important to make it better known, because I don't think it is known well enough at all by the people of Cardiff, let alone the rest of Wales. I mean, I think symbolically to have as it happens, a building, but a structure or a place which is dedicated to peace and health and justice is really important, and it's quite unusual, I think. I mean, I'm not aware that if England, Scotland, Northern Ireland have similar kind of places. I still to this day find it odd that it's called Temple. I'm not necessarily sure why the founders decided to call it the Temple of Peace. And I know through the years that I worked with UNA Exchange, because we worked with young people, we would not infrequently get parents calling up and clearly checking us out because of the name of our address. And there were some quite funny mistakes with that over the years. We had Temple of Teeth, Temple of Peace, the United Notions Association. That was one of my favourite. But yeah, the idea that there is this public space dedicated to peace, health and justice, but peace principally, is important. It's really important, never more so than now. So again, the work being done now, I think, is more than ever important. So you only have to open your eyes and see what's happening in the world today, and especially in Europe and North America today, to realise that I don't want to say fighting for peace, but working for peace and believing in peace is more important now than it's ever been in my lifetime. I'm 54, and I think these are the most fragile times we're living in, and you know, day by day, week by week, the change in the public and political dialogue that's going on is frightening. It's becoming more and more frightening. Whether it's Trump's attitude to detention, children being separated from parents, or one of the leaders of Italy talking about logging the Roma community in Italy. I mean, it's vile. And if you'd said 5, even 2, 3 years ago that this was going to be happening, this was going to be the tone of the political scene in the developed world, we'd have been quite baffled by that. So, working for peace and working for the promotion of diversity, of difference, of the love of that, not just the okayness or the not just that it's okay, but that it's great, that it actually makes life better and makes our communities, our societies better, is really, really important. And drawing more people into that, and of course, it's important. So again, a building like this can play a part in that, should play a part in that. I think it has a duty to play a part in that, actually.
How do you inspire or encourage people through this building to become internationalists of the future?
I think it is quite a challenge to get people into the building, young people, and many who do only have the experience of exams in this very room, so that's their first and maybe only experience. I think it is difficult, and I think as working in UNA Exchange, it wasn't something we found easy to bring people in. So I think a first step is to go out. Actually, I think if connections can be made out there, you gradually can pull people into here, but community events, and I think the last couple of years, more 5, 6 years, we've seen more events in this building of all sorts, you know, whether it's the Wales for Africa kind of events that you were referring to, or other organisations using the building. I think more of that going on will make it less unknown, less intimidating, and more enjoyed and appreciated for its symbolism, but also its beauty. It's a beautiful building as well. Yeah. So.
And do you have a favourite part of the building? Like, describe a little bit where we are.
I mean, no, I mean, no, definitely not an architect. I mean, I think I've always liked this room partly for its the kind of contradictions in it but that might be to do with the way I don't know if this should be put on film, but the way we use this room, that it's a formal room, and if it's dressed, it's definitely very formal. If it's dressed for weddings or events or whatever, but we would use it for parties. We had great parties in here, so I mean, I've got lots of late night memories of of dancing and lots of I don't know, glitter and tinsel around, and then equally late nights cleaning up. But that contradiction of Friday 5 p.m. it was closed up by the health authority in its normal state. Chaos reigned for maybe 36 hours, and then by Monday morning it was back in that same, it was a Mr. Ben kind of transformation. So I mean, it lends itself to that as much as it does to the formal occasions, but equally, I mean, the council chamber is really nice, and the library of Lord Davis, and the things in that room as well tell lots of different stories, don't they? I think the Russian doll in there is just stunning, and I've never seen it opened, but somebody in the Wales for Peace project contacted me, it was only about a year ago, asking about that. So I was involved in trying to discover through Robert and other people the story, and I hadn't known actually the story, that it was bought by I think it was a delegation of Czech youth workers, or from the youth ministry in Czechoslovakia, but from the Soviet, the doll is obviously from the Soviet Union. I think that's the right way around. But I think the main one is this sort of size, but it's 18 pieces down to this size. So I mean, I'd love to see it open, but that's really nice. There's a mug in the council chamber with Gorbachev on it that was brought to us as UNA Exchange from. It was interesting actually. It was a Soviet guy and an American woman who were a couple. I can't remember how they'd met, but who had started a youth volunteering organisation near Lake Baikal in what was by then, was it? I think it was just at the changeover, so it was probably the early 90s. So I think it was the Russian Federation by then. Maybe, but it's got Gorbachev on it, so that's quite there's history in that again. So yeah. So I started work here in early '88 and finished in mid 2016. I mean, the changes in that time. I started during the Cold War. It was still running, and then through that time, the changes in the situation for young people, the changes that we worked on because of those sort of changes, but also the opportunities that came around through the different priorities and policies of the European Union. That affected us a lot, because in a good way, because I think the value of volunteering changed, or the attitude towards volunteering changed massively over that time as a tool for citizenship. The attitude towards youth volunteering changed over that time, in terms of supporting young people to become active citizens outside of formal education. So the approach to youth work changed massively in that time as well.
For the good?
Well, for the good, and devolution in Wales brought financial support for that good. So we saw a period, I think post-devolution in the first half of the 2000s, of youth policy developing in a good way, of global citizenship changing. There was the whole ESDGC, Education for Sustainable Development and Global Citizenship agenda, which was given financial support as well. So there was this, for us as UNA Exchange, a really good matching of priorities placed on youth service, youth work, and on the outward-looking approach of Wales. Those two things together were great for us because there was financial support and an openness. There was a willingness to engage with the kind of work we were doing. If you compare that to the late 80s, early 90s, where we were struggling, there was and I think since our foundation in the early 70s, we struggled along. We muddled along with very little money, a lot of volunteer commitment and involvement. But it changed in the late 90s, early 2000s through opportunity out there. So I started work here in 1988, which was, by coincidence, was the 50th, that's not why I started, but was the 50th anniversary of the Temple of Peace. And it was also the inaugural year of the Welsh National Garden of Peace. So it was, Robert Davis was the driver behind that, and he'd been building that idea for many years. But at the back of the Temple of Peace was just a flat area of grass, which he designed the plan to have the UN symbol, the laurel leaves of the UN, in the as the centrepiece of the garden, and then obviously to plant the borders and trees and so forth. And we had a special international work camp that year in 1988 to work on the garden, to build it basically, to do the digging and the carrying and the planting. And we had, I think it was 25 international volunteers from more countries than we were typically working with at that time, and we developed some special partnerships in that year, and it included Algeria, which was quite unusual, wasn't particularly active in our field of work at the time. But really importantly, we had our first and only and our only ever volunteer from the Soviet Union. So this was in the dying days of the USSR. And I'll never forget, Alexei was his name, and he was no ordinary young person. I mean, he was somewhere senior in Komsomol, was the Soviet youth organisation that I don't know, millions of young people in the Soviet Union would have been a part of. And so he was sent. It not necessarily our idea of a volunteer, but it was great. It was brilliant that he was here. And he was interviewed on HTV on the launch day at the end of the project, the launch day of the garden. And the cameras were on him, and Alexei said, did I say Alexei? I think it was Sergei Alexei, said in really thick Soviet English. He was asked, why did you come here to do this? He said, because, frowning, he said, because when we do things like this together, we no make war with people. So, and it kind of, I mean, simplistic, yeah, but it really does sum up. It really did sum up for me the point of UN Exchange, that you put people together, especially young people from different backgrounds, different countries. It puts a face on difference. It makes difference less different. It makes difference your friend or the guy who makes brilliant food, or the woman who makes you laugh by her silly dance. And it humanises it, doesn't it? And I think it was, so of course the garden is very symbolic, as is the building, but that project in that year, in August 1988, at the beginning of my career in UN Exchange, really encapsulated what the place is about, what my organisation was about, really beautifully, simply. And it would be great to track down that piece of film.
But did you imagine that you'd be here for that? And are you still passionate about the work that you were doing, about these jobs?
I mean, I think as I say, I went to an international work camp in Germany in the middle of '86, and then started work on the Manpower Services Commission project in '87. No, I had no idea whatsoever what I wanted to do in my life. I studied arts in Cardiff, no idea at all. So I have no idea what I would have done if I hadn't stepped through the door that day. And it was a tiny piece in the South Wales Echo that advertised the international work camps. That's what led me to go to Germany. And it was all, I think my life has been a series of lucky breaks and chances, and no great decisions on my part. But it completely changed my life, absolutely for the better. And I think the opportunities I had in that time were amazing, whether they were here or out in the rest of the world. I travelled a lot and went to some crazy places with crazy people doing crazy things, but completely committed internationalist now, no question. I think I had that in me. I mean, my brother, who was 8 years older than me, he was your classic magic bus across Europe in the 70s, and went to teach in France, and then did VSO, and then, I mean, he lived abroad then for, I don't know, 20 years or so, and he was my biggest. I was child number 4, he was child number 1, so I was looked up to him anyway. So I think that the international spirit was there anyway. And my parents were quite open-minded, and but then my involvement with UN Exchange gave it to me on a plate. But what was quite interesting, I think, was by the end, when I left here, I was no longer director. I took a sidestep to be a program manager for what's called the Step by Step program, which was I would say was my real passion in the last years, and is still. If I talk about my work in UN Exchange now, I always talk about Step by Step, because that embodies everything I think that UN Exchange and all the years of development were about, because it was specifically targeting young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, to get them, it's still running now, to get them involved in international volunteering, not for its own sake, not to give them international opportunity particularly or alone on its own, but to give them a device or a vehicle for realising their potential, because so many of our young people have got so much but don't know it and don't believe it, and have been told they haven't. You know, they're not academically great, they're not achievers at school. Many of them come from very, very challenging family backgrounds, chaotic family backgrounds, and their self-belief is at zero. You give them, and it still puts shivers up my spine, but you give them the slightest opportunity and you support them through that and say you can do it and give them the tools to do it, and to then see what some of them do with that is incredible. And that cocktail, if you like, of targeted youth work with international opportunities, with fairly intensive support mechanisms, it does change people and change the world in that case. So I'm no less passionate about it now than I was then.
It's the 80th anniversary of the Temple of Peace. Is there anything you'd like to say to the temple?
Oh, bless you. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, keep doing more of what I think you've been doing in the more recent years, and opening the doors, keeping the doors open, and opening them wider to the public, and letting people know, and to some degree decide what goes on in here as well, so that it is a public building and it's used by the public. It's not just public in name, but it is in action, and do more of it.